Hi, people. First thing I want to say, I went to the cinema today. I'm going to do a film review in this video and also speculate on the implications of the message the film is sending out. But before I do that, before I left the house, I looked at my one of my last videos on Sunak's welfare policies and 7,000 views in a few days. That's a lot for my channel. So just a quick disclaimer that if you've made a comment there, I won't be able to get around all the comments. There's about 160 plus the last time I checked. So I'm flattered by the response. It was unexpected, but obviously it shows that that's a subject a lot of people care about. So if you did watch the video, thank you. Yeah, but if you want to raise the subjects in that video, then feel free to join in the live stream. But 7,000 views, that's, it's always satisfying as a creator to see that sort of viewership because it's unusual. My videos average about maybe 100 views, so 7,000 in a couple of days is yeah, it's good, very good. Okay, so I'm going to be doing a film review on Civil War. This is a film that's been much talked about, much anticipated in 2024, and I think I'm just trying to get up some of the key information about it. Check it out. Absolutely check this one out. I will say this right now. For me, this is the best movie of 2024 and one of the most intense films I've ever seen. I would easily give this 8 out of 10. Um, Now, some of the cast, I'll just do a name check here. Kirsten Dunst is sort of the lead star. Wagner Moura, Kaylee Spaney, Jesse Plemons, Nick Overman, Stephen McKinley. They're kind of the main cast members. Basically, Kirsten Dunst and some of the other names I've listed there, they play journalists. And the context of this movie, there will be a few spoilers, as I always say in my film reviews. The context of this movie is that there is a second American Civil War, basically, in a contemporary setting in 2020's America. Um, the film is deliberately vague, so there's no mention of Republicans or Democrats. There's no indication of what party the president is with. We just know he's a middle-aged white man. Um, and basically, the country is in the grip of a major civil war. So there's a Western alliance versus the United States, and there's other factions like the Florida. I think in the movie it's called the Florida Alliance, and there's others as well. One little thing people said you'd never have a situation where California and Texas would work together, so maybe that was not realistic. But the thing about this movie, it's I think Alex Garland. I knew him as a writer from The Beach. I didn't realize he was also a director. I think this is the first of his films I've seen that he's directed. But I would say his style is similar to Paul Greengrass. If you're familiar with the fellow British director Paul Greengrass, there's a focus on gritty realism as opposed to Hollywood sensationalism. Now, I think Hollywood sensationalism is it's fine. It has its place. It can make for big epic movies. What I mean by that is where you get a big budget movie. There's lots of explosions. That's a war movie, but usually it's interspersed with a bit of cheesy dialogue, kind of witticisms. With this movie, it's a lot more raw. It's a lot more kind of, dare I say, down to earth. This is not to say that there's no special effects used or anything like that. I mean, the sets are impressive. I was thinking they must have had hundreds of extras and, you know, rented out entire road spaces and stuff, burned out cars. But it's basically, you see a country that has basically collapsed. Um, and Kirsten Dunst is a veteran war journalist. Um, she has colleagues. There's a guy about her age, played by Wagner Moura. Um, and early in the film, she comes across a young, ambitious journalist played by Kaylee Spaney. I think she was in the film Bad Times at the El Royale. Um, and she basically saves the young woman from injury, and the young woman kind of looks up to her as a mentor. And then Stephen McKinley's an older journalist. He sort of comes along with them as well from the New York Times. So you have this kind of almost ragtag group of journalists that have been brought together. Um, two journalists probably in their early 40s, and then the other two, young women in their early 20s, and an older man probably in his late 60s, early 70s. They're obviously deemed to be vulnerable in the group. Um, the film is uncompromising, it really does show the grittiness of war. But it's a film that's through the perspective of journalists. So, for example, you'll have a scene where there's dialogue, and then the next scene is suddenly gunfire, and you're right in the thick of it. But this isn't gratuitous violence. I think the film is a very intelligent movie, um, because there's a lot of moral questions involved. Now, there's one scene, I imagine it'll become a famous scene in the movie. Spoiler here. Jesse Plemons plays basically a militia guy at a checkpoint, or not really a checkpoint, but there's obviously been a massacre, and they're basically loading bodies into quicklime, and two of the character Joel's colleagues, two Asian guys, they're kind of messing around. It's, I suppose, journalists. It's this thing of breaking tension. But anyway, one thing leads to another. Then they end up in being held at gunpoint by this militia, and it's a very very tense scene. And well, two of them get shot point blank. Um, Jesse Plemons is a psychopath. His character is a psychopath, or at least he plays a character who is very typical of. I mean, I'll say this: the film is not partisan, but I'm being partisan here. He basically reminds you of a MAGA militia type. You know, very America first. Very. He goes around asking, "Are they really American?" And obviously, it targets the Chinese guys. It's Yeah, it's intense stuff because it doesn't compromise. It shows it. But the film is, there are bloody scenes. There's one scene where Kirsten Dunst is looking back at her previous work, and you see a guy getting necklaced, which was a particularly brutal practice used in apartheid era South Africa. Alleged collaborators with the white apartheid government, black collaborators, had tires put around them and they were set on fire. Well, there's one part of the film basically shows that. Kirsten Dunst is looking back on this, and I think she was superb as a frontline journalist. I mean, it's an unusual role for her. I've seen a number of Kirsten Dunst films, and I've never seen her do anything like this. But she carried very much that cynical, war-weary journalist. It's sort of a cliche where you have this journalist who's seen it all, seen horrible things, um, man's inhumanity to man, and she very much carries that. It's almost like they're desensitized to violence, like a veteran soldier would be. Um, but even there's points they're clearly affected by what they're seeing. The ideas are getting from New York City to Washington to try and interview the president before the Western Alliance takes over. Disclaimer here, or spoiler, the Western Alliance does prevail in the end. They take no prisoners. They storm into Washington. They shoot. It's either the press secretary or the secretary of state when she's trying to negotiate with them. They barge into the, room by room in the White House, and we end up with the president basically cowering on the ground behind his desk. The film is uncompromising. But what I would say is this isn't just in your face gratuitous violence from start to finish. I think that would be lazy. There is breathing moments. It's not constant violence. There's a lot of suspense. The violence is there, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily excessive. It's there. Um, but for me, it reminded me a bit of Welcome to Sarajevo by Michael Winterbottom, which is obviously based on a real war, the Bosnian War. But the opening scene of that showed shell attack on the Sarajevo market, which really did happen. I think it was called the Markali shell attack of 1994. Well, in this movie, it starts off with a bombing, and you see basically mangled bodies on the street. But there's a lot of use of black and white, sort of photojournalist style takes. I think some people, I looked at the Google reviews, and I much prefer Google reviews to. I've no time for Rotten Tomatoes because they take 50 reviews and they use that to somehow represent the whole. The thing about Google reviews is a lot more reviews, but even on Google reviews, it only got 2.7. I don't understand that. I really don't understand that. I think this was an intelligent film. It raises a lot of questions, and this is what I'm going to close with. It raises questions about where America could go. Now, I don't think there's going to be a second American Civil War. Certainly not to the extent that's depicted in the movie. I don't think you'll have an all-out collapse where you have sort of full-on standing armies against standing armies in the United States in the 2020s. But America is more politically polarized than it's been for decades. I would say since at least the late 60s. We've had unprecedented events in recent years. What happened on the Capitol? On yes, I'm going to say the date, January the 6th, 2021, was unsurpassed. That has not happened since the British burned the White House in 1814. So there are the ingredients in the United States for significant unrest. Um, and I would be very, very surprised if come November there isn't some unrest. Even if it's on a small scale, I'd be shocked if it's completely peaceful, if there's absolutely nothing happens. That would really surprise me. Just given what's happened so far, given the personal animosity between Trump and Biden, given the tendency for Trump supporters to resort to violence, and let's not rule it out on the left either. If Trump gets back in, there may be some on the anti-fa side of things resort to violence. We just don't know. But I think the potential is definitely, definitely there, and that's alarming. I don't think it'll be a full-scale civil war. I don't think it'll be that big, but I do think there's a potential of violence and possibly deaths. It's really not inconceivable. I mean, American politics is not that detached from violence in modern times. There's been political assassinations. There's been violence at rallies. It's not inconceivable. Um, but like I said, I don't think it'll be a full-on civil war. Nevertheless, the film offers important talking points around this, like can Americans talk to each other, or are they so politically polarized that it's just there's no room at all for dialogue? That's concerning. Um, I personally think conspiracy theories are very dangerous because they tap into a way of thinking which is not really rational, and where people get that tunnel vision, they go down a rabbit hole and they don't care what the truth is, where they reject democracy. And then on the other hand, when you have paramilitary police, so I think all the ingredients are potentially there for America not to go through a second civil war, but at least significant unrest, the most serious at least since the 1960s, if not worse. I think the the ingredients are there. So I think the film, to me, serves two main purposes. Firstly, it shows the dangers that frontline journalists take. Even though this is a fictional conflict, that the film could be Somalia, it could be Ukraine, it could be Gaza. Over 100 journalists have died in Gaza. It could be any conflict in the world today. Um, but the fact it's in the United States really brings it home, I think. So it should be a testament to the risk that frontline journalists take, but also it's a warning about where America could head. I think this was a superb film. Um, I think it stands out, and I think it should get some sort of nods at next year's Academy Awards. It probably won't because the Academy Awards has a long history of missing out masterpieces. So it probably won't, but Alex Garland can hold his head high, as can the cast. To me, this was a powerful, powerful movie. Um, if of any critique, a very, very little, I would simply say the ending was a little bit closed. Maybe they could have wrapped that up a little bit better, had some sort of conclusion. But I think the vagueness was part of the point. They didn't explain how the Civil War started because that would have meant being partisan. So the vagueness of the film is actually one of its strengths, in my opinion. But do check it out. If you've already seen the movie, let me know what you think of it. I think it was a masterpiece. I really do think it was a very powerful film. I thought it would be good, and my expectations were exceeded. It was even better than I thought. Um, but yeah, to me, this is a film that deserves credit, deserves being seen, um, and reiterates my interest in journalism. Whether I'll ever be able to do that or not is another question. But yeah, it just reiterates my respect for frontline journalists. Okay, let me know your thoughts if you have seen it.